Hello, it's Classy here back with another Tribes video, and today we're going to do the tier list for Flashback Genealogy, continuing on the series from before where I cover every single updated tier list. Now of course disclaimers are the same as always, and I will have posted them at the beginning of the video in text, so make sure to pay attention to those so you don't misinterpret the information. And the reason that this video was a bit delayed was that we had to do some fixes to the website, and one of those fixes included adding my team building tool so you can access it now straight from the database website. Now the link is as above if you want to access this tier list, but obviously I like the numbers better for more specific ratings and comparisons. So let's jump right into it. Remember, FG, you're going to mainly focus on Master 1 and Master 2 because those are the hardest stages and most people can do the beginning. And the way it works is you obviously start with the 4 cell, you keep your cell rotation as normal, so there won't be any randomness involved with your units, and you'll go force all the way back to spirit. So at the top of the rankings is the SS tier, and we have 4 individuals here. One of them may surprise you a little bit, but let's start off with Kakashi. So in the 4th cell, you're going to need some insta-jutsu units ideally, because on turn 1 other units won't be able to jutsu, and since you only have 5 turns in FG, it's really important to get as much damage as you can in the beginning and jutsu on the first turn. That is why Kakashi and KCM is there. Now of course Kakashi does a ton of damage on his own, and by the time you come back to a cell on turn 4, he'll have enough chakra and he'll also be stacking buffs on himself, so he'll do even more damage. So overall, a very crucial nuker to any FG strategies. KCM is also an insta-jutsu unit, and the first time when he insta-jutsus, he'll provide a ton of buffs. I've talked about this a ton of times before, so just as always, get those important buffs on your team, and then the second time he jutsus on turn 4, he'll have enough chakra and then he'll do a lot of damage and also provide a lot of buffs for your team. And for FG, it's most important to have offensive buffs and defensive debuffs. Most of the defensive buffs are not as important because it's unlikely that your units will be getting killed during this, but they might be somewhat important if your power level is a little bit on the low side. But for the purposes of this tier list, I'll be considering the characters with the best offensive buffs or defensive debuffs, or maybe they have some very strong nuking potential like Kakashi does. Sai is the chakra battery for every mode. Ninja World Tournament, we talked a little bit about why he might not be as good, but for every other mode you really need him. And for FG, in order to jutsu as much as possible on all the earlier turns especially, you're going to need him there. So that is why you need to have Sai. There's nothing really else to explain. Now Nagato, this is a unit that not everyone has. But first off, he has the 5k vitality, which is important for turn 2 jutsus at the earliest if you want. And his actual jutsu itself will reduce damage reduction rate, so like I said, the defensive buffs, and also guard rate for 3 turns. And this is really crucial because in 3 turns you can do a lot of damage. That's 60% of the FG run. And then he'll boost all allies attack by 14%, which is also great, so more offensive buffs. Then his 4th skill is really important because it triggers every time one of your cells is attacking before the opponents. In other words, your cell's faster, and for FG your cell will always be faster because for these PvE modes the computer's speed is very low. So therefore you'll be constantly getting critical rate by 15% and damage increase rate by 12%, or critical damage increase rate. So that's even better than damage increase rate actually. It's definitely rare, and the damage increase rate is already covered by his other skill. So overall, he is very good If you have the Tomb, you'll get even more offensive buffs by suppressing their guard. So that was our top tier units, and right below them is the S tier. You are heavy. So he falls under the nuker category. He just does a lot of damage, and he can stack buffs upon himself. He does more to tactical shinobi also, and he has the initial 5k vitality, which allows him to jutsu on turn 2, so in the spirit cell. The stun is pretty useful, because sometimes the opponent's jutsu might increase their defense, so if you have a stun, then they won't be able to do that. But yeah, mainly he's just here for nuking and doing a lot of damage. Now Datara is a prime buffer. He also has some debuffs depending on if you inflict the status effect or not, but his most important buffs are related to critical damage and critical rate. So he increases critical rate, he increases critical damage increase rate, so important buffs that you're going to need for any FG run. Obito also falls under the category of nuker, but he does lower the target's damage reduction rate by 35% for 3 turns, which again is very important. And he does a lot of damage on his own. He also has a really great vitality, so you can put him in Spirit Cell, and he'll jutsu on turn 2. So just like Nagato, this is 60% of the run. He also has some attack buffs. And for Datara, his vitality is not 5k, so you want to put him in energy, ideally. Now here's a new unit that we added. This is EMS Sasuke, the current unit, and I'll do a showcase on him. He also has the 5k vitality, so you can put him in the Spirit Cell. Now he does a lot of good damage on his own, and he also boosts damage increase rate, critical damage increase rate, which is the important offensive buffs. So very important for doing a lot of damage. Those two are the prime stats. There are not too many stats to worry about in this game. Then you can also boost critical rate. Now, maybe the status effect suppression rate could be a little bit helpful to save you time, so you don't have to keep doing more runs. But yeah, he is actually really great for this mode also. He just increases the right stats. Now we're going on to the A tier. I'm not really going to cover much beyond the A tier, maybe a little bit of B, but past the A tier you shouldn't use too many of these characters unless you're really missing out on units. Maybe you have a newer account, that I understand, but for the most part, all of the A tier and above units, some of them are definitely easy to acquire, including Kiba. He is a new unit. Now, keep in mind that even though he's at the top of the A tier here, he's not actually the best unit in this tier. It's just not organized by their actual number rating. But anyways, he's mainly a nuker. He has the insta-jutsu, so he can jutsu right away. You can put him in force if you want. And he has the attacking first buff. So similar to Nagato, every time one of your cells is faster, they get 10% attack buff. And that sounds pretty good, but it's just not as impactful as Nagato's, because he increases damage increase rate and critical damage increase rate, I believe, or critical rate and critical damage increase rate, and those are just more important. Okay, Shikamaru. We know Shikamaru is good for debuffs, and as you can see, it lowers damage reduction rate by 50%, but it's not as long. He can also boost tactical shinobi, which is somewhat helpful because you're going to have tactical shinobi on your team. The support units are mainly tactical, size tactical, and he also has the initial 5k, but you don't want to put him in Spirit Cell usually. So he's definitely decent, but not the best one to use for FG. Haku, you probably don't want to use. The vitality isn't too good, but you can put him in Force Cell, maybe try to use the skill 2 because of the pretty significant attack buff for 2 turns. He also lowers defense by a good amount for Tactical Shinobi permanently, so he is way better against Tactical Shinobi. That's usually when you want to use him. And he's not power creep, so his damage isn't going to be that good anymore compared to some of your other options. Now we have Jiraiya. People like to use him for the tribe, but obviously we aren't considering tribes inside this tier list. This is unit by unit. He has the good vitality, and he is important for increasing tribe gauge because sometimes you do want to use strategies where you tribe earlier than on turn 5. So that is why he has a lot of value, and he can also buff Tactical Shinobi. He has some buffs where he has to be defeated first, so that's obviously not going to be very useful. But he is mainly used for that purpose. Kirin definitely fell off because he used to be the prime debuffer. He can do pretty good damage to defense Shinobi. So lowers damage reduction rate, boost active allies attack. It's not too good, it's only the active ones for that turn. So yeah, and his vitality obviously doesn't help too much. CM2, people don't talk about him too much, maybe because they don't have him. He is not too commonly found, but he has the good 5k vitality. He does good damage on his own. And then he also has a attack buff that is better than Kiba's. It's basically the same thing. So every time any one of your cells attacks first, you get a boost in attack. So again, this is not as good as Nagato's, but it's still very solid, and he fits on a lot of teams because he provides the buffs and he's also a good nuker. So he kind of has a hybrid role, jack of all trades style. Toby, really good against D units. We're all using Toby right now to take out Jugo. He permanently reduces damage reduction rate, does good damage for AoE, and then he lowers damage reduction rate even more. So he lowers a ton of damage reduction rate for defense Shinobi. So you definitely want to use him against those. Against other Shinobi, probably not. Itachi, Toby's vitality is also 5k, so that's really good. But we like to have him in Force Cell even because his skill 2 actually permanently reduces damage reduction rate by a lot on top of everything else. So for Itachi, he has a pretty bad vitality for this. You're going to need to put him in energy because his skill 2 isn't going to be very helpful. But if he does jutsu, he boosts attack for 3 turns, which is basically all the turns after he jutsus, and then critical rate. So the stats that he's buffing are not the best ones, but they're not bad. And his 4th skill isn't going to be very useful, but the guard suppression rate will. So that is offensive. And if you LB2 him, he'll actually give even more solid buffs, but he is in the energy, so when he's boosting the active allies, it's not as impactful as boosting all other allies, because in the energy cell you have Sai and then maybe another support unit, so the damage isn't going to be there. It's mainly going to be on the other cells. Again, the vitality isn't too good, but you can use him in Force for his skill 2, which is alright, but there are better skill 2s for sure. So this is always going to trigger, so that's good to hear. The attack buff is a pretty good number. Then he increases damage increase rate also, so that's alright, but it's only for the 3-man cell. So definitely better options, but he's still viable. if you LB2 him, he'll boost critical rate, so that's alright also. Tigara. Vitality, not the best one. The attack buff is solid, higher than some of the other units we've seen. Skill 2 not useful, skill 4 not useful, but the LB2 is pretty solid. Extra damage increase rate, and he also does alright damage too. So some people have used him in this FG specifically. So again, damage increase rate is going to be the prime stat. It's going to be more impactful to buff that than attack. Santa Naruto, really great. Vitality, you put him in Spirit Cell, and then he can debuff on his Jutsu, damage reduction rate, and guard rate by very solid number. And he also buffs himself, so he'll do good damage on his own. So that's basically it. Kid Kakashi. So he lowers damage reduction rate for defense shinobi. That might be useful. And then his vitality is not the best one, so you'd probably want him in energy. He can boost attack ghost shinobi with skill 2, which is alright. Not too helpful. And then he has the fourth skill that is similar to Nagato, Kiba, CM2, where basically every time your cell is going first, they get these offensive buffs applied to them. So these are better than CM2 and Kiba's, because those are just attack buffs. This buffs damage increase rate and critical rate, so that's really good. And then LB2, not very helpful. So Kid Kakashi is still really good for this mode. He just gets a lot of buffs over 5 turns. Minato is actually really good, besides the tribe, of course. He has the good vitality. He does a lot of damage, especially against D units, so people are using him for this FG, of course. He boosts himself, and then he also boosts damage increase rate by a good amount for his 3-man cell, so since he's in Spirit, usually it's actually going to be pretty impactful. And this is a good number. This is LB2. And his 4th skill boost attack, also for the same 3-man cell, so that's also very helpful. So Minato, very good unit for FG. Almost there. Mitsuki, also initial 5k vitality. There's a trend going on here, as you guys might be able to see. These debuffs are not very helpful. He does good damage also. T-Nuker. So he'll boost all active allies damage increase rate by 12%. So that's a helpful boost, damage increase rate. This is on LB2, only to the active allies, of course. So he does a lot of debuffs, but he's debuffing their attack stats, which is not very helpful. Yeah, so Mitsuki is probably rated lower on the A tier. Mei. So the vitality is not the best one, but you want her as a support unit, so you put her in energy anyways. Boosts critical damage increase rate by 20%, which is a very high number, so that's really helpful with her jutsu. So she also boosts critical rates for active allies, which is not going to be too helpful on the energy cell. But yeah, the main thing for Mei is the critical damage increase rate boost by 20% on her jutsu. Kid Sasuke. He gives chakra with his 4th skill. That's not going to be very impactful here. You're not really going to get a situation where if you put him in, someone might jutsu earlier than expected. Most of the time, Sai will do the trick for this FG mode. So vitality, not the best one, but you can put him in force or energy. He boosts all allies' attack by 14%. His first skill is pretty good also, permanent attack buff. His second skill is pretty good also, permanent attack buff. Then his fourth skill boosts his active cells damage increase rate by 15%, which is a very high number for this passive boost. Again, it's only affecting the active allies, but in this case, it's going to be impactful because they are going to be nukers likely and not support units. Chakra I've already talked about. And yeah, that's basically it for him. Tobirama is very good against T units. His vitality is not that good, so you put him in force or energy. Probably not force, but sometimes you really have to make space. So when he jutsus, he'll deal nuking damage to Tactical Shinobi. He is AoE. He boosts critical rate by 20% for all allies, and then critical damage increase rate by 20% for all allies. So that's very impactful and good numbers. Then he also boosts active allies attack by 12%. Then he lowers damage reduction rate by 10% for Tactical Shinobi. So again, he's really good against that type of enemy. And yep, that's him. Shikadai serves a similar role to Shikamaru. So his jutsu will reduce damage reduction rate on the target by 35% permanently, so really helpful. Boosts critical rate by 40%, so really good. Guard suppression rate by 35%, which is also really good. That's offensive. And then his skill 2 is also really good, so that's something to think about because his vitality is not the best one also. So you want to put him in energy mainly, or most of the time. Then his cool ability is his fourth skill, so lowers damage reduction rate and guard rate by significant amounts for 5 turns starting at the beginning, and that's basically the whole FG run. Last one in the A tier is KLM. Vitality, same as Shikamaru. Looks like all of these vitalities are either like the chakra gain after the second turn or 5k or 10k, so very interesting pattern. KLM does AoE nuking damage, boosts damage increase rate by 15% for all allies, so that's really good. Critical rate by 20% for all allies, also really good. Then he lowers all enemies' guard rate by 20% and guard damage reduction rate by 15% for 2 turns, so also really good. And he serves as both an offensive buffer and then a defensive debuffer. So at the beginning of the video, I talked about the 2 important aspects that a unit needs to have to be useful, and this is pretty much all satisfied here in one ability. Then he also boosts tribe gauge, so sometimes you might want to tribe earlier than turn 5, so again, you can put him in for that also. Skill 2 is not bad, but definitely not the best. Skill 4, damage increase rate increase, critical rate increase, critical damage increase rate increase. So also really, really strong. Skill 4, it's only the active allies, but he gives more than enough buffs at this point to all of them. Then LB2, probably not going to proc, maybe once during the FG run if you defeat someone early. But yeah, overall KLM is actually really good for FG, which is very important for him. His PvP is not necessarily going to be the best, which I've covered before, but his PvE is really strong. So ATB, he is top tier, and FG he's getting close to the top tier, not necessarily at the very top, but very nice to see this unit have some very redeeming qualities. Now we have hit 25, so not really going to cover much in the B tier. Most of these guys just either don't buff enough, or they just don't do enough damage anymore as a nuker. I guess I'll cover Sasori a little bit. Sometimes people need to put him in because they just don't have enough initial 5k units, right? So you can put him behind Santa Naruto, just like the arena strat, and he'll do some debuffs. Let's see. Itachi's not actually too terrible, or Itachi, but he definitely has limited usage depending on who the opponent is. So if your team has a lot of attack shinobi and you're fighting defense shinobi, you could definitely be put in. Now the last one I'll cover for now, going to be Madara. So I think he's like an 8, so he's pretty high on the B tier. And he definitely does some very good debuffs. This is very important. He has good chakra, vitality. Then the problem here is that the force skill is purely defensive, I believe. Yeah, it pretty much is. So that's where this unit falls off. But his jutsu is really strong, and that should definitely be good enough, depending on what units you have and what team you have. So for me, I have him in there. Well, I'm against Jugo right now, so he does more damage to defense shinobi. He can do card. I can put him in spirit, and that's just me though. So overall, I've covered everything I want to from this tier list. I hope this video is helpful, and I hope that you guys have good luck in your FG runs and gain some knowledge for building teams for future FG runs. Thanks for watching.